Hey Whitney, have you noticed that the old ways of working aren't working anymore?
Yes, Iris. Let's talk about it. I'm Whitney.
And I'm Iris. We are two elite executive coaches / moms / recovering Olympians. We found that we had to unlearn so much of what we were taught as elite athletes and women to gain more freedom and health.
And we've seen our clients facing the same dilemmas. As coaches, we get this front row view of high-performing humans. And we realize we're all trying to make the best out of our potential, both at work and at home.
We will take you behind the curtain and share with you how we untrain our clients and ourselves from toxic mindsets and habits. We will offer you the frameworks and tools to live and work with more ease and joy.
Welcome to Untrained.
Hi, Whitney.
Hi, Iris. Welcome to Untrained.
So I think we start every podcast with a intention. So for the podcast and what we want people to get out of it. For today, what is your intention for this podcast?
Well, we've thought carefully about a structure for today because we're evolving and growing and learning as we're doing this. And within that, there's a lot. I'm a client example, so my intention is to be very present and open about my process. Container and open.
Container and open. My intention is to have some tools for the people listening for change, the discomfort of change.
Yeah.
This may
Let's
evolve.
talk about change.
Yeah, we're going to talk about change.
Let's talk about change. So it's beginning of the new year, and a lot of our clients are in new. There's a lot shifting in terms of roles. People in this role, that role, leaving, arriving, and a lot of change. And we can bring intention to our changes. We can bring tools to our changes. I think it's really helpful to step back and take a big picture view of things. We're doing that a lot with our clients. So what are we doing? What are we saying when we are looking at these larger changes with our clients? You talk a lot about preparing for these shifts and setting people up for success. So what does that mean to you?
That's a good question. I put a lot of emphasis with my clients on preparation as they're trying to change and shift things because it gives us a feeling of control. Mm-hmm. When we change, we often are letting go of some things and letting go of some control, but at least having a plan in order to act helps people feel like, okay, at least I'm prepared for this or I'm prepared for the change, just not just walking out. And my visual for that is kind of, we've just started watching Indiana Jones and he's starting to step out and you have to have faith in order to step out onto the bridge.
Right,
and
the rock doesn't appear until you take the step.
Exactly. And so we get stuck on the ledge before that appears. So a lot of times I think about, okay, people do need a bridge or they need a step or they need some rope or they need some help. And so for me, I emphasize preparing people to change. How do we set up your week? How do we check up on it? How do we act? And how do we mentally get prepared? How do you help your clients with as they're facing change or as they're shifting? I would love a story. I think you have a client story too.
Yeah, well, no, I can talk. I feel like a lot of people, so I work with a lot of folks who are stepping into new roles, larger leadership roles, and this time of year. And so part of what we're doing is kind of stepping back because what they need to do is become more strategic. What they need to do is delegate more. What they need to do is manage their own bodies and make sure they're taking breaks and task switching and like their health habits. Those are the things that are really important to focus on and kind of step back and look at. But what happens, the challenge is that when we're in big change, we're often triggered. Right? The imposter syndrome, I'm not enough, or how do I do this? So we kind of go backwards into our old ways of doing things, which might be a little bit more of a doer mentality, which might be a little bit more effort or fast or so oftentimes sort of the internal triggers, and it's been happening to me lately, are at odds with what you kind of need to be doing in the new role. Right? You need to be more measured. You need to be more disciplined. You need to be more strategic. but there's a part that's like, I just gotta go as fast as I can, because when I'm done, that's when I can relax, because I'll know I've done it and I'll prove it to myself.
You said you have a personal story about that, or you're in the midst of it. So,
Yeah,
what do you
no,
resonate with?
I've been very humbled. I mean, feel like I spent a lot of last week like having a lot of these coaching discussions um, and going, and then there was sort of a crash over the weekend and realizing like, oh, I'm totally operating from a very old over efforting part. And I found this Instagram video that demonstrates it perfectly, where it felt like it to me. There's this lab, this like old, sort of looks like an old soul lab, and he's watching this Jack Russell Terrier go, "Zoop, zoop," and he's sort of like, what the heck are you doing? What the heck are you doing? And I feel like, there's some wise part of me that's like the lab, and then like the older triggered parts of the Jack Russell list. It's like, this is how fast I can go. This is how fast I can go. I don't really know where I'm going, but I can go really fast. And that's sort of how I've been operating lately. And it can feel kind of good for a while, right? Like, ooh, I'm getting this done. But then, I start to feel really disconnected from myself. I feel disconnected from the people around me. I'm tired. I'm not sleeping well. And it just it's like sugar. It's like Cheetos. It's like any of those things, right? It sort of feels good, and then after a while, it feels bad. And so it's been very humbling to kind of really see myself in that old pattern, and having to get honest and bring a lot of the hard part. The hard part is to bring a lot of compassion. Why I'm doing it, what I'm afraid of, what I'm trying to get, and to just like sit with that part of myself with a lot of compassion versus judgment, because judgment's so much easier and it's such a well-worn pathway. And the harder part is the slowing and the compassion. And I know I'm not alone in that.
Why do you think? I've thought about it a little bit myself too. Well, a lot actually. Why do you think the compassion is so difficult and judgment is so easy? All of our
Because it's the
clients have that.
pathways. Yeah, I mean, like if I go back to my rowing days, like, come on, Whitney, like, what's wrong with you? Like, harder, come on, another one. Like, it's that, like, come on, like, go, push. And I mean, I don't know where the voice came from, but it was punitive. And it accompanied me for many years, right? Like, well, I know where it came from. If there's something wrong with me, and if the better result is up to me and my improved efforts, I am in control. And if it is not up to me and my improved efforts, I am not in control. And that's harder. So come on, Whitney, like, that voice gives me a sense of control. Like if I'm what do they say, like piece of shit the universe revolves around, like if I like improve myself, then things will get better. But if it's just like, wow, this is overwhelming, this is hard, that's a very different story. And I have to feel different feelings than just like something wrong with me, I need to fix myself, I need to improve myself, I need to go faster. That I can do very easily. But like slowing and this is kind of you're overwhelmed right now. This is new. This is different. You're afraid you're not going to be able to do it. Like that's a very different pathway that I've been working on, but it doesn't have as many foot treads.
Tell me about the difference between when we use the judgmental, you call it manager, to help us push through or feel control versus when we have compassion. What might be different, right? Because what I'm hearing is this judgmental person can actually push us to move to great lengths, right? You got through last week and you did it really well. Then you crashed. What's the difference of having the compassion? When you add that to your repertoire or your toolkit, what's the difference?
For me, when I bring compassion to the Jack Russell Terrier, going back and forth, I can come out of operating from the Jack Russell Terrier. Otherwise, it's very hard for me to get out of that. I just want to keep doing it. But like, oh, what's going on, Whitney? Why are we in Jack Russell Terrier mode, or I call it Queen ADD mode? what's fueling that, and what does it feel like, and just being curious, like, what does it feel like to be the Jack Russell Terrier? Like, what's it like? What are you trying to achieve? And I usually do this. Sometimes I do this by myself. Sometimes I do this with support of my own coach. But when I bring compassion, I can come out of that mode and I can get in touch with what I'm actually feeling and tend to it, and then my system can relax, because this just doesn't feel good for very long.
I think about it as your nervous system is just on adrenaline, right?
Yeah,
So when we go into our
it's like the pre-race
exactly,
or pre-talk or pre-gig,
we're always in a heightened level of just fight or flight. And so it goes and it goes until we hit a wall. And we could be very, very successful going from, and both of us have been very successful going from a place of these old patterns of just push through it. Come on, Whitney. Come on, Iris. Come on, come on. You know, we've gone a very far distance with it. It works in short bursts, but what it doesn't do is add consistency and sustainability, because at some point there's a crash, and at some point there's,
Right.
what am I doing? What's going on?
right.
So tell me a little bit more. I would love to kind of think about this compassion piece and also just tools, right? So you've told me too that when you see your clients and they give themselves some more compassion, give them themselves more space to change, what do you see in them? What's different? What changes and shifts for them? What do you see in your clients?
So, and what I want to reiterate is, this is for myself and for everybody else. This is a process. It doesn't happen in 1 week. Although I was hoping it would. It happens over time, and it happens with micro shifts and small experiments accumulated. And mindset shifts and like just bringing different way of being, and that's unique and different for each client. But over time, I wouldn't keep asking people to run these experiments if I didn't see people become more confident, healthier, and more resilient within their system, and like more capable. Because when you're coming out of that, would you want that Jack Russell Terrier to be your leader? Like, no, right? When you come out of that and you can connect more with yourself and all the different parts of yourself, you're able to be more strategic. You're able to bring your attention to the things that matter most. And you're able to like step out of that chronic sense of anxiety. And again, this takes time. This is not overnight. And for a lot of my clients, they're working with me, some of them working with me and a therapist. So it's, but I do over and over and over again see that when people take that counterintuitive step to focus on themselves, to create a little bit more space, to step back, they get the results they want. They just get it not by doing this, by kind of landing and connecting.
One of the things we talked about too that I like that you said running experiments, that you and I talked about, is becoming a scientist. So one of the tools that I work with my clients with.
And what's important about the scientist is that non-judgmental scientist part. Yes. It's a scientist like watching the Petri dish, curious about what's going to happen, but not judging what's happening in the Petri dish. Just like, let's see what happens when we add this and this, right?
Exactly. And it's a series of experiments. So 1 week we can try, okay, maybe if I, let go of this one meeting, or maybe in this week I try to work out twice and see how it goes. And we set an intention. So that's the planning part we talked about too, is we set an intention and we try it for a couple weeks. And you become the scientist, where you go back to, I like the Petri dish, where you go back to the Petri dish and you go, okay, what's happening? Am I able to make it? What's getting in the way? What's happening? And having that third party non-judgmental piece helps you ask questions rather than get stuck. Just yesterday, working with a client, is instead of the curiosity, there was a lot of judgment. So what happens with judgment is it creates the swirl in your mind, and it creates a swirl, and you're thinking like, how do I control this? But when we can step back as the third party, then we can ask ourselves better questions so we can actually get out, right? So instead of a dead end, it becomes another door.
Yeah. I mean, I think of judgment as sort of this like, it doesn't get you anywhere. Sadness can get you somewhere. Anger can get you somewhere. Judgment is just sort of like, if you're having an argument or a disagreement with someone, judgment is just the person in the room like screaming their head off. Like it's just making it hard to hear the other person, right? So the more we can quiet judgment or ask judgment to step aside so that we can be with what is in the room, I think that's a valuable tool. And practicing that, I mean, coaching, we're ideally that non-judgmental perspective, and hopefully we can use that to help train that perspective within our clients.
Yeah, you said yesterday when we were talking about this is that the coach is the scientist. And what we do is we are modeling the behavior that eventually you can internalize. This scientist, this non-judgmental, curious person who is just trying these different experiments. One of the things to at Change, I consider myself the not so resilient Olympian. And one of the things that really has helped me shift and change, yeah.
Is that like under your Instagram title, the not so resilient Olympian?
It's my new moniker. I'm writing articles around it because I realized at some point I wasn't very resilient. People saw that in me and they're thinking, oh my God, she's an Olympian, so she can push and grind through things. But I realized when something didn't go well, or if I tried an experiment and it didn't happen like this, or it didn't happen the way I wanted, or I saw it, I immediately started to judge myself and then would just stop or hit a dead end. And that to me is not resilience. So I do call myself the not so resilient Olympian.
What's your definition of resilience now? What is the resilient Olympian look like, or resilient Iris look like?
So I'll give you an example from this morning. I am running around. I have a sick kid, and she's at home. And my husband said this yesterday, I need a ride to go get my oil changed in my car, and then I have to get here by 9:00. So the not so resilient Olympian would do things angrily and with tons of stress. Come on, let's get out the door. I don't care if you're sick. Let's move it. And let's, come on. And my car's not clean. This isn't happening. That's not happening. And like everything is at a higher level of stress and nervousness and also angst and judgment, where then I would show up to you and we would have to do this podcast, and I'm angry. I'm just angry, bringing all of that anger into this, like things aren't working out the way I want. But the person that I've worked on, what we did was I gave up myself some time. I let you guys know we had to start a little later because of this. I explained it. I let go of the judgment around it, fear of what you guys would think of me and being late. And then I picked up my husband and I said, you're going to have to sit in the back. There's just a bunch of stuff on the passenger seat. He's fine with it. And I gave Anya my cell phone. I said, play some music. She's into 80s music. Oh, so we start playing this awesome 80s music, and then we start dancing. And then we're dancing. My husband starts dancing. He has a really stressful day ahead of him, but he's now in a good mood. I'm in a good mood. Anya's feeling better because she's listening to music she likes, and her parents are dancing in the car. We're driving, drop off my husband, come here, and you and I start, and we're ready, and I'm happy, and I don't feel levels of stress. And the other thing I would say is physiologically, my heart rate's lower, which means my stress levels are lower, which means my adrenaline levels are lower, my cortisol levels are lower, which is healthy. So instead of having everything be such a struggle and everything be so upsetting, it then can be joyful. I'm not waiting for a moment that something's complete in order, let's get this done so I can then be happy or have an hour to be happy. I'm going to be happy now. I'm going to turn on the 80s music and I'm going to listen to it with my kid. I'm going to dance in the car because that's what it is I'm able now to enjoy the moment. So I'm focused on the right thing at the right time. I'm able to enjoy the moment. And then I'm able to be here with you without bringing all of my baggage to this conversation. So that's resilience versus not. But, that took a long time. Yes, thank you.
I feel like we need to celebrate that. That took years. That was hard earned.
Super hard earned. It's super hard earned because it did take time. And that's the thing about change, and it takes time. And that's the one thing you and I wanted to talk about too is, and what I was going to say, one of the biggest lessons I learned was we don't have to fix the emotion. We can be uncomfortable, we can be upset, but we don't need to run away from that.
Well, I will say ideally, right? And but for folks who've, you know, used these manager parts to get through life, I think without some support, it can be hard to sit with the emotion, and you need to sort of titrate it or do it slowly. And that's why some of these experiments, like, hey, I want you to take a break or not look at your phone in the evening, like that might bring up a lot of really uncomfortable emotion. And so we need to work with our clients to do it at a pace that works for them, and find ways to get in more support, so that the emotions don't feel overwhelming, because they can. I mean, look, little Jack Russell Terrier, like he's trying to avoid something.
Run away. The other thing too, we talked about stress plus rest, and that is from Brad Stulberg, and you got to help me with that.
Steve Magnus, Peak Performance, board member from Valor. We lived that book a lot. It's a beautiful book. You know, I always would just hold it up, be like, if you don't believe me that rest is valuable, read this book. You know, it's just study after study after study, of a, you know, former corporate soldier and a track coach bringing together what they learned through trial and error to talk about the value, physically, emotionally, everything, of taking breaks for our performance, for the sake of our performance, right? If we used to be an exerciser and we're in this project and we're working so hard that we're not exercising, we're missing out because it makes us smarter, right? It gives us energy back. But there's a part that's like, you can't exercise until this is done because right? You've got to grind, and helping folks see a different perspective. So I went on a little, what do you want to say about Brad and peak performance?
The stress plus rest is important. So I think about one of my clients who started a new position, like you said, went from manager to director, and things were very hard, and he's exhausted. And I said, of course you're exhausted because you're using new muscles, you're learning new things. And when this is the preparation piece, is know that you're going to be in that state of change. And what happens is that the state of change needs processing time. It needs to let the dust settle. So think about whenever you hit, I'm a CrossFitter, so whenever we hit a personal record, or we're lifting more today than we did, that we have had, so we hit a nice personal record. But it means that we're going to be more tired for the workout the next day because we've hit it pretty hard.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that when it comes to cognitive work, we think that it's limitless. So that's when you come in with the motivation piece too, is motivation, energy, it's not limitless. So if we're going to think of, like, when you are learning something new, that energy bar goes further down. It's like an app that needs more battery power. So if you think about it that way, it's not an app that just can run. We have to think more. We have to have more intention around it. So just remember that when you're under more stress, the battery runs down more.
Yes.
So you're going to need to plan to have more rest. And I think you hit the nail on the head the other day when you said, I will rest when X is done. And what we're trying to say is it's a continual process of learning, and the rest needs to happen in the moment. Otherwise, we're going to hit a wall and you're going to be forced to rest.
Like what happens to me over and over. I mean, this is like my life lesson. I mean, one of them. I improve upon this and I fail at this, prove upon this, fail at this over and over and over and over again. But I keep, making incremental progress and moving the bar along. But I love what you just said. And that's where bringing some compassion and some understanding and stepping back, I think, can be really valuable. All right, I'm in this big shift change process. Sometimes my clients don't like the word rest, so I use the word active recovery.
Yes.
Because because athletes need active recovery, corporate athletes need active recovery. So if rest is sort of, you don't like that word, think of it as the active recovery to get to the growth.
So I'd love to get to the point now. Let's give a couple of tools. What kind of tools would you give if I'm someone who now I've moved up to another level? I'm coming to you and I'm saying I'm overwhelmed right now, and all I'm doing is trying to this to-do list is getting longer. I'm just trying to get through the to-do list, but I'm missing big things, and I'm just exhausted, and I'm just spinning my wheels. So what are some tools?
I would start by saying, it's because it's personal. What are the health habits that have always served you that you are not making time for right now? What are the things that have always served you in being balanced, feeling good, feeling healthy that you are not making time for right now? And, usually it's I'm not sleeping enough, or my sleep hygiene's off, or I used to exercise regularly and that's really slipped, or I'm not spending any time with my family, or, I not even eating lunch, I'm not eating properly. So it usually is I'm just stuck at my desk, right? I'm in my home office or blah, blah, blah. I'm not getting out. And so I usually just say like, well, if we would get you back into one of those that would reap the most rewards, which one would it be? And so I'm just curious with the client about it. I don't have the magic answer, but it's usually in those domains.
How can you also help a client, or just, I know this is hard because it's not a client here, but with the compassion piece, what's something they can do to help themselves in that way? Like I'm always telling myself to push harder.
I usually step back and help them see the big picture of how well they are doing and how much progress they have made and how much effort has gone in to get to this moment where they feel they need to, climb another mountain. So just helping them see that it's going to take time to climb the mountain and that they have time. Helping, and I might do a deeper dive with someone and getting curious, but I'm just sort of talking about the big picture. Helping them realize they're not alone. They do not need to do this alone. They have colleagues, they've got friends, they've got people who work for them, whom they work for. There's often when we get to this place, it's like, I got to do it alone. Because often vulnerability doesn't want to ask. Sometimes, we feel that shame or judgment about needing help. So reminding people how healthy, normal, appropriate, empowering, all those things to get help and ask for help and not feel like you need to soldier on alone. So I'd spend a little time in the big picture, but then we might get really curious about the Jack Russell Terrier, like what's going on there, and spend a little bit of time.
So with the compassion piece of it, it's gaining some perspective, getting some support if you need it, and getting curious. One tool from Limitless Minds.
And I think the other thing, sorry, I didn't mean it, but my brain was lagging in the answer. I think it's also helping the person see how hard they are trying and how, even if it's not, something isn't working, what their intentions are. And that I think sometimes is helpful to bring out compassion. Like, let's look at what's going on here and let's look at how hard you are working, how well intended you are right now, right? And that can usually help bring compassion versus like, well, let's look at how far you are off the mark.
As coaches, we are kind of like a mirror where we're mirroring back to you what you might not be looking at or seeing or not wanting to see. I was just going to say, I work also for Limitless Minds, and one of the things they say is for the compassion piece, I think it works for this, is don't listen to yourself, talk to yourself, meaning we have these negative thoughts constantly going.
Yeah.
Instead of just allowing the tape to run, what you're doing is you can talk to yourself of, you're doing a lot of really good things. This is really hard. Yes, but you're doing it. And so talking to yourself versus listening to yourself.
And talking to the parts, like, I definitely have a very judgmental part that I recognize very well that shows up. And, when it shows up, I'm like, oh, here you are. You always show up at these times. Like, I'm not going to listen to you. Thank you. And it won't always go away, but I now have a conversation with it, which feels a little bit more like there's a bouncer in the room versus just me in the room with this really judgmental voice.
Is there any last tool that you think would be helpful as people are managing the discomfort of change that you think is,
Looking at
we've talked about compassion. We've talked about giving some more time and pacing. We've talked about a third party that helps kind of see things. We've talked about becoming a scientist and being curious. Getting support is another thing we've talked about. Is there anything else that that you think might be useful as people are transitioning and changing, and especially now?
I guess the one other thing that I sometimes talk about is in terms of that big view of change. There's something called Prochaska's stages of change. I learned this as a young therapist, and that we think change is like it happened or it didn't, but really that's just the action stage, and it's actually a 5-step process. So there's pre-contemplation where you might not even be thinking, hey, I really, I've become too sedentary or whatever. And then contemplation, like, I don't feel as good. I'm kind of achy, da 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 da. Maybe I should start, I don't know, Joe's walking at lunch. Maybe I'll do that. Then preparation. I'm going to get the running shoes. I'm going to, actually take a break on lunch, da 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 da. All this needs to happen before action. And then you're in action, and then you need to maintain it. So people often think that change is just this switch, but it's actually often a longer process. So helping people see, if you're in preparation, like you haven't actually done the thing, you're actually like kind of far along in the process. And what's going to happen next is action. And maybe you're not quite ready yet, but we're going to keep working, and then you will be ready. And it takes motivation to make changes. As we've talking about, when folks are in these bigger changes, there's a lot of energy being taken up managing all of this. So that's another place to bring compassion. There's less available energy, so we need to be really thoughtful and strategic about where it's going and where we're getting energy back. Active recovery.
And recovery, right? So there's a lot to take away here. The last thing I'll say, just something very simplistic I use with clients is, I know there's different things out there, but this is Iris version, the not so resilient Olympian version of it.
I love that. I need a bumper sticker and a t-shirt.
I know, it'll become the new hashtag for us. Is I like the strategy of plan, act, check, and adapt, right? So you plan, I'm going to do this, I'm going to try it for 3 weeks and see what happens, right? So then you act on it. And then you're checking on it because you're a scientist, what's going on. And you can choose a couple questions to ask yourself, how do I feel? How do I feel about doing this? Those kind of things. And then adapt is, what are some things that need to adapt? Because no matter how well you plan, you're always going to need to adapt. You're always going to need to change things up.
And this often happens, if you have a coach, this obviously happens here, but I will often say, with your team, figure out some questions that you want to be asking regularly as you're in this big change, and put it on the calendar, and every 2 weeks, everyone answers these questions, right? So turning it into a habit or a ritual, that checking part, I think, is valuable.
Oh, we got to talk about habits and rituals and checking.
I did my last thing. You did your last thing. We put a lot out there. At the end of the day, there's tools you can use, but noticing if you're in a judgmental or a overly driven or overly harsh mindset, take a breath, take a step back, and we invite you to shift that.
All right, Whitney, keep on training.
Keep on training.